Good morning. Charlotte and Jenny, can you please just keep an eye on attendees as they come into the room? But as we've got a couple of us here now, I think let's make a start because it's 2 minutes past. So thank you for everyone for joining us, and thank you very much for our speakers. We are going to be recording this event, but we are recording it in such a way that it's only the speakers that we can see, so don't feel too worried. If you don't want to be recorded, you can switch your camera off, but you shouldn't be recorded visually anyway, unless you are one of our speakers. Thank you for joining us. We will also be live tweeting, so if you want to follow along, our Twitter handle is Trueman Change, all one word, and we are going to be using the hashtag Change Chats, again all one word, but please do feel free to submit any questions and comments in the chat box. So we've been running these events now for actually since the start of the pandemic, or not quite the very start, but not long after the start of the pandemic. And they come really from a place of curiosity around how we managed to make change happen in a very different way as a result of the pandemic. So organisations made change happen in a way that was much more human focused, it was at a faster pace, and we wanted to explore that and understand why and how that happened. And we've done quite a lot of research on this now, so we've been able to develop, we've spoke to a number of different organisations, I think it's about 150 people from around the public sector and some from the private sector too, to really understand how they managed to make that change happen quickly. And we've developed from that a new methodology of post-COVID change, if you will. So the working world has changed drastically. So the way that we deliver change has to change with that too. We can't go back to this old way of change that was, you know, very lengthy, ongoing programs that might take 3 or 4 years to really make an impact after people have managed to make change happen so quickly and stepped up massively during the pandemic. So we've developed a new methodology around this, and it has 6 aspects to that. And the first and most important aspect to what makes change, good change, is creating that sense of purpose. So that's what we wanted to talk about today, is how do you set up a change program and create that strong sense of purpose. So we've got 3 brilliant speakers joining us today, who I know all 3 of them, which is lovely, and I've worked in some way with all 3 of them. So Penny is an organisational development consultant, and she has spent the last 10 years as a career and leadership coach. I have used her services as a coach. Penny has supported me many times over the years since I very first decided to become self-employed. And she's also conducted leadership programs for several organisations, including in local government. And she's delivered organisational development activities around culture change, end-to-end restructures and recruitment. So lots and lots of work in change, in that kind of OD space and in that people space. And we also have Paul Masterman. So Paul is a public sector, predominantly local authority consultant, and he's a specialist advisor, he's an interim manager, he does a lot of writing and blogging, and his experience and specialism is all around improving public service communications, as well as resident engagement, employee engagement, transformation, public policy, all of that kind of comms work. And the reason why we've got Paul with us today is that having a sense of purpose but it's not shared is a bit of a waste of time. So I can't wait to hear Paul's views about how we create that shared sense of purpose and we communicate that and we get people on side. And then finally, we have Lyndsey Sims with us. So Lyndsey is the CEO of Hyndburn Leisure and is the Hyndburn Hub lead. So at the start of the pandemic, many leisure services were closed down, and Lyndsey got the job of sorting out the Hyndburn, which is a council local to us, sorting out their response to COVID. And as part of that, she had to create this hub, which involved over 40 partners coming together at very, very short notice to deliver for their community, to make sure that the people that needed support most got it. So right at the front line of the pandemic response, and very much around that, getting lots of people from lots of different organisations together and working in the same direction. So some brilliant experience to share with us there. And we've been working with Lyndsey in recent weeks to do an evaluation of that piece of work, and we know how good that piece of work was. So I'm really excited to hear that story. So how do you create a sense of purpose in times of change? I'm going to come to you, Penny, first with that big question, if that's okay. What have been your reflections over the last 18 months or so?
Wow. Well, yeah, purpose has just become at the forefront for so many people. I mean, from an organizational perspective, but an individual perspective as well. I've worked with so many people over the last 18 months, probably the last year. I think after things started to, the pandemic really was in the full flow, people started to really evaluate their role, where they were working, and feeling like they didn't know what their purpose was, and they were working for organizations that didn't know what it was and didn't share it. And I've done so much work with individuals trying to help them find their purpose and then fit with organizations so that have a sense of purpose. I think it is so important right now. People are so more aware of, you know, why they're going to work and the impact they have, and therefore it's so important for organizations to be able to understand what their purpose is, to communicate that and to live it and to breathe it. So in terms of trying to develop that sense of purpose, I've worked with a number of smaller organizations try and find the purpose. And it always starts with the leadership team, really trying to understand what the vision is, to understand what the values is, to understand their why. And it's not just from the leadership team where that's created. It is, you know, across the entire organization. You've got to get that engagement. You've got to understand why people work for that organization and what the impact of their service or product is. And I've seen some fantastic change happen as a result of people really getting why they exist. So for example, one of my clients manufactures and designs fire alarms, and you would think that would be quite, you know, it's a bit like nuts and bolts, but actually when you get under the bonnet of why they exist, it's to save lives. And, you know, just to understand that point and to communicate it, the buzz in the organization around why they were coming to work, people just felt intrinsically motivated because of, you know, having the ability to share in that purpose and to deliver that. So yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question, but it is really at the forefront, and people are moving jobs. They're moving jobs because if organizations are unable to communicate a purpose, have a purpose, allow people to express their purpose, they're moving on. And as you say, you know, younger people are very much driven by that. So it's just, yeah, absolutely critical at the moment.
Thank you, Penny. Lyndsey, tell us about the sense of purpose you saw during the pandemic.
Thanks, Lucy. So yeah, obviously the sense of purpose was a worldwide purpose, wasn't it, around supporting people, particularly in the early days around those who were clinically extremely vulnerable. So there was, in some ways we had an advantage because there was such a well-known purpose, but in many others it was really just broadening that out, because very quickly we realised it wasn't just about those who were clinically extremely vulnerable, it was also about anybody that was experiencing change in their lives. We heard of breakdowns in relationships, which led to financial issues. We all know about the issues around food poverty, fuel poverty. You know, those were real things that we had to tackle during the pandemic. But there was a huge sense of purpose driven across the whole of the area. And I think Paul's going to come on to this much more, but the communication of that was so essential. I remember that first day, so the Monday after lockdown, I was in the boardroom at the council offices, and one of the things the leader of the council shared was communication is really important with this. And I took that literally. So every Sunday was my communication day, because it didn't feel like it was a 5-day week during the first few weeks of the pandemic. It felt like it was absolutely 7 days a week. And I used to put together a presentation because I felt it was an easier way to digest, that was circulated across everybody that wanted to know. So it was literally everything we'd done that week. It was all the people who were involved, We had permission from them to share their contact details so that we could connect with each other as well. And a huge part of the early weeks was literally my phone didn't stop, and I was meeting new people every few minutes by a phone call, because I was what I was told was a SPOC, which I've never heard before, but I was single point of contact for Hyndburn. So I think I had one of my colleagues whose husband was a police officer that told me what a SPOC was. But it was that, you know, welcoming people in, you know, so creating that sense of purpose and making sure that people knew that they could be part of this as well, and they had a really key role in all the outcomes that we've achieved over the last 18 months. I think what our next challenge is going to be, Lucy, and everybody's how we translate that, the networks that we've built, the great relationships and the ways of working that we've built into tackling other population health issues. Hyndburn's one of the most health deprived wards in the country. We're 9th out of all the local areas. And we have really low healthy life expectancies, so people are on medication and are dealing with challenges within their own personal health at a younger age. So we want to tackle that, and we want to address health inequalities as well, not just across our area, where you could be 49 in one ward of Hyndburn and 64 in another, just 2 miles down the road before you pick up a long-term condition, but also with the national averages as well. We really want to tackle those. And the challenge will be how we translate the way we've worked and the purpose of the pandemic into those issues, which actually could even be more significant to our population, and if we can tackle them in a positive way, could have a bigger outcome as well. So that's where we are at the moment, and definitely communication has been huge, and building trust between all those organisations. Learning about the organisations too has been a revelation, and spending time hearing from each of them, because so many people have got so much to provide and to give to the community. So much learning. Like you said, Lisa, there is an evaluation that's just been completed, and we're showing that and sharing that across networks now, far and wide, because we're really proud of what we've done. And we also recognise that there's some learning from that we can take forward and others can learn from as well in the future.
Thank you. Paul, what are your initial reflections about how to create a sense of purpose?
Very similar to our two colleagues, really. Funnily enough, I'm rereading that book that we all carried around in the office called Nudge to show off a few years back, and they've just updated it, and that reminded me that of the key word in all these discussions, which is human. Economists think we're all rational beings who make decisions based on weighing up the evidence and the pros and cons, and then we go off and buy what we want to buy, or go out with whoever we want to go out with, as it were. But actually we're human beings with our flaws and our biases and our emotions and our perceptions based on misunderstandings and all those sorts of things. And I think the danger with any of this change stuff that we're talking about is that we forget the human. And I think it's a key word in your model, Lucy, that you've just launched. And I think, you know, to be frank, that's the first model that I've seen in change management that uses the word human. And humans like stories, and purpose and narrative is about telling people stories. I mean, we've all spent lockdown binging on Bridgerton and Tiger, what was that thing? I can't remember what it's called now. Whatever it was, anyway, we love stories and we tell each other stories. And the only thing that often we don't do in change management is tell people stories. We tell people about what we're doing and how we're doing it, and we throw Excel spreadsheets at them and so on and so forth, but we don't tell them stories. And I think this is about telling people stories. Just very quickly on the pandemic, both of you have already mentioned sort of the learning from the pandemic, and I think there is a danger that we might forget that learning almost instantly. Let's just break down what the pandemic was about in terms of purpose. One is that for once in our life, we had a very clear focus on why we had to do things. I mean, literally, this was about life and death. People were dying, we needed to stop that, and getting very, very ill, and we needed to stop that. And that all of us, whoever we were, had a very clear purpose, have had a very clear purpose in life for the last 18 months, 2 years or so. the second thing about that is that purpose was shared by everybody involved. So overnight, all the stresses and strains of that partnership working that we're involved with, and stakeholders and staff and whatever, went out the window. We all turned up at work, virtually in most cases, knowing why we were there and what we had to do, and we're creating and innovating, and over weekends coming up with sort of new ideas and so on. And that led to, I'm just a jumped up PR man really, that led into very clear communications, at least at a local level. We can talk about the national level later, but in a local level, in terms of what do we need to tell people to stop them dying? And communications, which I think this is all about, and I would say that, wouldn't I? Was literally the function of communications in organisations was literally at the top table. It was seen as a strategic thing and so on. I'll stop talking in a second, but I see that as a bunch of important lessons, which I think already we're starting to forget. And we're taking the wrong lessons out of the pandemic stuff. The right lessons are about narrative, focus, purpose, clarity. What we're taking from that is speed, breaking rules, working long hours, doing things over the weekend and whatever. And already the business as usual has started flooding back into our organisations, and all those great lessons from the pandemic are in danger of being lost. And we're starting to dilute our understanding of what purpose is about in our organisations. And I think that's a challenge for all of us on this call, and all the people who are listening to what we've got to say. I'll shut up.
Thank you. I think you raise a really good point about the fact that the pandemic did impact everybody in some way. So we all had a personal connection to it. I lost my dad to COVID. I had to cancel my wedding. I had all the stresses of running my own business during the pandemic. And everybody on this call will have similar personal, hard-hitting stories about the way that it impacted them and the people close to them. And I think that for me, the positive out of that is that sense of purpose, we have to make sure that it is something that people connect to. So for me, a strong sense of purpose during a change program, and it's hard to make change happen. It's hard to override the habits that you have. So there has to be a really compelling reason to do it. And for me, I think post-COVID, we need to think about how relatable that sense of purpose is. Are people going to connect with it? Are people going to understand it? And that's where storytelling really comes in. Is there an emotional aspect of it? And often I see organisations having very large change and transformation programs that are purely driven by numbers. And so in the private sector, that might be increasing profit. In the public sector, that might be making savings. I think it's important that although that world exists and is very real, and we do have to live within our means, it's not why people come to work. You know, when you're talking to people like social workers and teachers and healthcare staff, they didn't come to work to make savings. They came to work to change lives. So there's something about making sure it connects on an emotional level, I think, which the pandemic did provide. And then the third thing, and I'm very hesitant to use the word urgency, because I don't think that change is always done well when it is under massive pressure, but there does need to be some reason to act. And whether that's just saying, if we do nothing, this will happen, you know, it doesn't have to be a global pandemic where the threat of death is imminent. But I do think there needs to be something that promotes that sense of action. I'm just curious, Penny, particularly given your background of working, you know, on a psychological basis with individuals and organisations, how do you see that going forward? Do you think that organisations are starting to understand the importance of those things? Am I missing something? Are they not the most important things? What are your reflections?
I think, yeah, it's been really interesting to hear what you've all got to say. And I was thinking, oh, I need to mention that, I need to mention this. But I think, yeah, from that psychological perspective, I think what's so interesting is what you said, Paul. It's like human is part of this. Never before has people been the focus. So your feelings, your emotions, your insecurities, your, you know, all these things that we all felt, from the CEO right down to, you know, to the very bottom of the organization. No one was left out of that uncertainty and fear, potentially. So suddenly we all went onto Teams or Zoom. We were all talking to people that maybe we'd never actually spoken to before. And that communication came to the fore, and the human came to the fore. So if you look at it from like the psychological perspective, where organizations are just so often driven by outcome focus, the bottom line, you know, the profit, suddenly it became about people focused. And, you know, suddenly it was okay to be, it was required to be empathetic and to be compassionate. And I really do hope that is going to continue, because I think so many organizations have seen the benefit of involving people, engaging people, listening to people, you know, allowing people to step out of their role to actually to contribute in different ways towards that purpose. And I think so many organizations have realized the benefit of this more inclusive approach. Yeah, the fear is that you know, organizations go back to how they were. You know, I see some horror stories about, you know, on LinkedIn, for example, with people ranting about, you know, we need everybody back in the office, and, you know, we just need to crack on. And, you know, we've learned so much, and we can see how empowering people benefits productivity. And I think by closing down and back into the way that we used to work, I think people are going to walk. They're not going to be prepared. If they can walk, they're not going to be prepared to go back to how it was. They now know that purpose for them to enjoy their work, to feel fulfilled, is possible, and it's very, very important. So they will walk and they'll go elsewhere. I know one organisation where people are leaving in droves because of the way that they've just kind of turned back the clock and tried to go back to how it was, and people just won't accept that anymore. So, you know, if we all know there's a major skills shortage, there's never been so many job vacancies before, I think. And so organizations, if they want to go back to how they were, they might not be able to, because they won't get the staff. And so people suddenly, the employees have power, they have a voice. So hopefully it's driven from that way, but if not, from the leaders that realize the importance of you know, having purpose, sharing purpose, communicating that purpose, living purpose. So I'll shut up too.
Lyndsey, what are your reflections on that whole, how do you make sure that we keep that sense of purpose going forward? And I see, not just from your organisation, but from across local government, there were some amazing partnerships formed, and people were connecting with other public sector partners, community groups, residents in a very new way, which is something that as a sector I think we've always tried to do. We've always held that very dear, but I've never seen anything like how it was done during the pandemic. So what are your reflections on how you keep that shared sense of purpose across different organisations? I think that is quite a challenge.
It is, and it does feel very different to how it's felt before. You know, one of the reasons I was seconded over to do the hub work was because of the work we've been doing collectively across Pennine Lancs for Together an Active Future, bringing lots of different people and organisations, groups together. And this has just expanded on that in so many extra ways. What I'd want to reflect on first, though, as well, is that there was a few phases we've had. So we're 18 months or so now into this process, or into this time scale. 2 weeks in was quite a big marker for me. I noticed huge differences from lots of people, and I think it was a level of adrenaline starting to leave people's bodies, exhaustion kicking in, and also the reality of their organisation. Like Penny said, a lot of people are focused, I think you said it as well, they see around, making money, saving money. A lot of the people that were part of this fantastic effort were leaders in their own voluntary community sector organisations and their public sector organisations. And those first few weeks allowed us to forget about all those financial pressures and those output pressures. So a couple of weeks in, that started to seep back into people's minds. And a lot of conversations and time I spent probably between that week 2 and week 5 were one-to-one conversations with local leaders around kind of what they were looking to get from this process as well, because none of us expected it to go on for as long as it did, and it still is. We were hopeful really it might be a matter of weeks, probably a month. I was doing these weekly reports and they turned into like week 50 at some point. So you know, frank conversations with people about what their purpose is coming out of the pandemic as well. So looking at, I'm sure they won't mind me saying, but our community voluntary sector organisation, we're looking at how they could lead on volunteering for the borough, how they could be better placed to manage small grants, how we could, you know, devolve more money into the local community voluntary sector as well. And we've done all those things over the last sort of 6 to 12 months. And people have been very open, and we've been, you know, very willing to hear from them and have those honest conversations about actually how their organisations, how them as individuals can help the, you know, the way that we work to continue and to thrive in the next, you know, 10 to 15 years, not just the next few months. So I think that's been really, really key. Honesty comes out loads in our evaluation, and people feeling like they are equal partners, and there isn't a hierarchy. So I think where you have that feeling and that kind of emotional buy-in, people are more likely to be honest. And then I think, you know, that leads to ultimately better outcomes, because with cards are on the table, this is what I want to get out of it. And we might say, you might get a bit of this, and if you do that, you might get a bit of the other. But the positioning in terms of how each of our different organisations and people are contributing to really positive change in the area has led to us being one of 14 council areas in the country to get £500,000 from National Lottery potentially as well, to do more work around our Healthy Communities Together work. So people are seeing the positives that are coming from working together, and we have had a few quick wins as well, where we've been able to devolve resource and devolve leadership to different organisations and people. And I think that needs to continue to ensure that people have that tangible kind of buy-in to this process, so that we can collectively move forward. It has been a real revelation for council as well. I know that for sure from talking to lots of council officers and councillors, members, elected members as well. Just the way the public's embraced the council. It's been many, many years of austerity for councils, and that's led to quite negative feedback from the members of the community. So having something really positive, really inclusive, very human focused, using kind of Paul's terms as well, lots of case studies of how we've affected change and positive outcomes for residents, has allow people to see the council in a different way. I'm sure that there's many other ways that they'll find to see it in a negative way as well. That's just the general kind of way things are, but that's been a real revelation as well for the local authority. And I know that's something that's replicated across Lancashire. I've met with colleagues on a frequent basis from all the districts, and Burnley, and Blackburn and Blackpool, and everyone's done a fabulous job. It's now how we take it forward. And there's some really strong examples coming out of Burnley, obviously the work we're doing in Hyndburn, and other areas across the 14 council areas of Lancashire. So lots and lots of things to learn and pick up from over the next year or so.
Thank you. So I'll put this out to any member of the panel. If you were starting a new job tomorrow, whether that's in an organisation or advising an organisation, and they were about to start on a big change programme, but they needed some help developing their thinking around that sense of purpose, how would you advise them to go about it? What sort of things would you be asking them to think about?
Can I just jump in and I'll sort of answer the question, but also say something I want to say about, which is a real politician's way of handling this conversation, which is about what goes wrong when it doesn't work, as opposed to what do we need to do positively to make it go right. And I think that part of the answer is, I'll answer to your question. I think there is a danger that, I think there's a big challenge around leadership. This is all about leadership in our organisations, and I defer to Penny as the expert in this area. I'm not an expert in this area, but it's about time that leaders started leading in that sense. And that is about inspiring people, motivating people, and explaining why things need to change and all that sort of stuff. The trouble is that often leadership is interpreted in organisations as being about telling people what they need to do. So a lot of the communication, in particular around transformation and change, is around around transformation for its own sake, not why do we need to transform, but we must transform. So I've written statements like, we must transform ourselves, no change is an option, we need to get on with it, you know, we can't afford not to make these changes, but no one ever explains why. It's so simple, childlike questions that, you know, your kid, you know, Dad, why this, why that, why, and we dodge that bullet all the time. The other aspect of this, and I think this is partly answering your question, Lucy, I hope, is around, it's often very inauthentic. It doesn't come from the organisation. It actually gets imposed on the organisation. So I've done a lot of work recently around narrative. I'll put it into the chat box shortly. There is something that a group of people and I have worked on called the one story for local government. We recognise that thing. I think both Penny and Lyndsey have mentioned that we need to capture that energy and that understanding, that support for local government as we come out of the worst of the pandemic. But what does that story look like? We did a workshop recently with about 30 local authorities, none of whom had a clear story to tell their communities as they were coming out of the pandemic. So we've come up with a story, one story for local government, and produced a book, which I've got here. And I'll send you the link really, but I think that's the start of starting to talk about an authentic purpose that comes out of the stories people are telling themselves in their communities and in their houses, the stories local authorities are telling themselves, the stories that our partners are telling, and not all of it is positive. We need to have, again, I think it might have been Lyndsey who said this about having honesty about what we're talking about. If you're not honest, it just turns into PR. And I've done a lot of internal in my life. You know, I've taken the shilling and written the internal PR and the newsletters and the PowerPoint presentations, all that sort of stuff. But nothing beats having human, open, transparent conversations with the people on the ground who are delivering the service. And more often than not, they're not telling you things you want to hear, but you need to start listening to those. So it's about communication in a real sense, about engagement, rather than sending out, you know, if I never saw, you know, I'd be pleased if I never saw a change management e-newsletter ever again, because that doesn't engage people. That just tells you about work streams and spreadsheets and targets and journeys and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't tell anybody about why you're doing this big thing that's actually going to change their lives, and in some cases mean that some people will lose their jobs. Does that go anywhere to answering your question, Lucy?
Yeah, and as somebody that's come up the ranks in sort of project program management, I can certainly relate. The number of times I've seen, you know, we need a staff intranet page because we've got a change program, and then we put on it when the next board meeting is, as if any member of staff cares when a board meeting is. I think we do somehow get into a space as change managers where we communicate things from the program perspective and not from the perspective of what people actually care about. And one of the tools that we use, and it's really simplistic, is we run workshops when we're doing change where we just keep asking over and over again what will be different. We ask it from different perspectives. So what will be different for residents, what will be different for staff, what will be different for managers, what will be different for partners, and we just keep hammering at it. And then you build a story around, from different perspectives, how does this change actually impact that group of people, which then enables you to come up with much better comms and much better measurements. Because the other thing we do is we measure, yes, we've held a board meeting, tick. That doesn't mean anything. That's not got you any closer to what will be different. But I think the practice of project and change management has got a little bit lost, in my opinion, in just creating the process and following the process, and not focusing on using the process to get to what the change will be. Penny, what are your reflections?
Oh, yes. Yes, thanks for coming to me. I was going to jump in there. I think that, yeah, that everything you've all said is so spot on. I think asking why, and what's the impact if we don't do it? And I think it's like what you said, Paul, not everything that you're going to be discovering is positive. There's going to be positive impacts, and there's potentially going to be consequences that people don't like. But if you explore it with people and you allow them to make sense of it and allow them to understand from a personal perspective the importance, people will they'll get on with it, they'll understand it, and they'll participate. Anything done to anybody is just going to alienate. So it is so important that when you're asking those why questions, that you're asking it from the people that will be impacted as well, if you can. So you're referring, Lucy, to different groups of the community. If you could have working groups with them to really to bring it to life more, so people can identify with what you're changing, is so important. But I think you talked about leadership, Paul, and I think, yeah, it does. Leadership is absolutely critical in landing real change. And I think from my perspective, I do a lot of work with leadership teams, and this is it's a common theme, and it's so unfortunate that leadership teams, they come together, they're the senior leadership team, and they don't see themselves as a team. They come as the head, the director of finance, the director of operations, or whatever, and they come to represent their division, but they don't see themselves as a team. So I do a lot of work with teams, trying to understand how important it is that that team is the first team, and that's about leading the organization and doing it collectively. Because if that doesn't happen and change is afoot, who's accountable? So, okay, it's happening in operations. Well, Bob, that's your division, so crack on. You deal with change. But actually, it's an organizational responsibility, and that team collectively should be leading that and communicating it. So every message that comes out of a leader's mouth is consistent. And as you say, these are stories, and you can clearly communicate why the organization is doing that. And I think when you think of these teams that lack this cohesion, they generally lack trust as well. And trust is absolutely critical as part of a leadership team, to be able to have those difficult conversations and to be able to come together. So yeah, so much needs to be done around leadership, in terms of that leadership team, in terms of leading and communicating, the purpose of change.
Thank you. Lyndsey, do you have any reflections?
Yeah, I think, obviously the experience that I've had this last 18 months or so was the complete epitome of the quote, building the plane while I'm flying. And it's probably not the advised way of change management, introducing something new. But what we did during that process, because of, we had to do it that way, we started to reflect quite quickly. So by June, July, we were having good conversations with key leaders around what the learning was already, what we wanted to be, what we wanted to keep hold of going forward into the future. So what now, Lucy, from our evaluation, is the work we've done there is to cement that into a set of principles of how we work with each other, and to make sure that we don't lose sight of them, and to reinforce those ways of working. Things like everyone has a voice and is listened to. We trust our partners. We keep talking about that word. We actively build relationships. We always try to find a common purpose. So these things we've built on now, and they've not been things that have been top down, just given to all these, hundreds of people that have been part of this process. They are things that people remember saying themselves. They contributed into different forums or different ways of working. So they are owned by our area, and hopefully as well, people that move into the area to work or live can also embrace those different principles as well. And that's been something that we want to take forward into the future. I'd also say as well, just picking up on the chairman of the team approach as well, it's even harder to form a team when they're not your employees. That's a real challenge when it's a hybrid approach and it's lots of different people with their own responsibilities. What we've got through one of our largest networks, which is our Community Action Network, which I nearly rebranded to Community Champions Network because we had a big Community Champions project, which would have been a very silly thing to do because the Community Action Network, obviously acronym world, spells CAN. And our Community Action Network are severely proud, so proud of the fact that they do things, that they can achieve things, that they make things happen, that they do things, that they don't just talk about things, they work together, they connect, they make a difference to the local area. And I think that came out in our evaluation interviews and questionnaires, that we can achieve things, we can make a difference. So I think there is some real sort of magic that's happened there that we want to maintain and want to move into other areas. But recognising that other challenge, as Penny described it, we need to get senior leadership buy-in, and Paul talks about the leadership. This is one of our next challenges, is to look at some governance around our population health partnership, which the CAN network will be a big part of the doing, but we need the strategic buy-in and the leadership at the next level, whichever way we put that on a piece of paper, to ensure the resource and the permission, if you will, is given to those people who want to do and make a difference as well. So again, some big challenges for us, but fortunate that we're working across this national pilot as well to learn from 13 other areas across the country. And we think that it's been done so many times before and failed. We want to look at how we can just make, even if it's just, there's going to be a level of failures, and that's how we learn, but to make sure that we make it the most effective model of governance that we can, so that it's not just there for board's sake and meetings and reports' sake. We're really passionate about that.
Yeah, I think that is a whole other topic of conversation of learning from COVID. I think was actually applying the right level of governance, rather than necessarily us defaulting to a comfortable level of governance, which may in fact slow things down. Paul, you've talked quite a bit about storytelling. Do you want to, just for people that are on the call that perhaps haven't used that technique, do you want to just run us through what that looks like in a corporate sense when you're setting up a change program? What does that look like?
Yeah, happy to. I'm just picking up on what Lyndsey's saying. I mean, Lyndsey's stuff is so impressive because it's about real people working with real people on the ground and not worrying to death about models and techniques and processes or whatever. It's just going with the flow of common sense. But if anybody wants the more pompous, posh version of Lyndsey's common sense, I recommend they go online and search for Engaging for Success, which is a web-based tool based on research, which identifies the key components of good staff engagement in order to deliver measurable success. And the stuff that Lyndsey is doing is identified now. One is around having and I'll go into this in a second. One is having a very clear strategic narrative, not some pompous, I'm going to use a technical word here, corporate bollocks sort of strategy. But what do we want to be famous for as an organisation, and how do we communicate that? Secondly, it's going back to the leadership point, it's about engaging, having managers who have the ability to engage staff, listen to them, tell the story, report their stories back to the more senior leadership and whatever. And often we forget that sort of hardcore of middle managers, giving them support, the training, the encouragement to communicate this. Thirdly, it's around and Lyndsey again mentioned this, what people like us, like me, because I want to show off, call employee voice. But actually is giving employees skin in this game, because they're the ones who are going to have to deliver this change for you, and listening to what they've got to say to you, even as we've all said before, they may not always be telling you things they want. And then fourthly, it's back to leadership. The Engaging for Success stuff talks about what they call it organisational integrity. So the leaders, not just putting your values and your leadership principles on the wall on a poster. I mean, do that, but actually living that dream in reality, in the way that you behave on every day. And often you find that in change management, all the change managers are stuck in the M&S suits in an office managing the program and actually not getting out there and behaving and communicating and acting with the integrity that we want. So engaging for success, which is actually based on real research rather than just people earning day rates like me, just making it up as we go along. Real research into how staff engage. In terms of, again, to use another pompous word, socialising purpose in an organisation, I think it does go back to your question, Lucy, around, you know, how do you get an organisation to start telling stories? And there's no clever magic dust way of doing this, but you need to get the organisation telling each other their stories and capturing those. So there is some hard yards of work to do in terms of workshops and conversations and coffee break drop-ins and online blogs and messaging tools and whatever, to capture what people are really saying about their working lives, and what your partners are saying about you as an organisation, and what the media is, and central government, and so on, and capturing that material into, and then based on that, starting to capture the themes and the ideas that are coming out of the stories that you're being told, and creating your own version of what the new story could look like, and then doing that in creative ways. And I put on the chat, into the chat box, the one story link, but that link also links to a local government association toolkit around narrative. So I'm trying to dilute, you know, several thousand words of a toolkit into two minutes, but that will give you some tools and some ideas in terms of how you can then start writing your story, testing it back with staff, starting to engage leaders in behaving in the way that you're starting to talk about in terms of your story, and so on. But it's about stories, about telling each other stories, capturing those stories, and what might feel quite a dull way, creating a new story in a darkened room, and then taking that into your organisation and seeing whether it runs, and if it does, codifying that in every element of the way that you communicate and behave as an organisation, and keep testing it with an inch of its life, in order then to, you know, as the world changes, you need to change with it. There is a danger that, you know, in these very long-term change programs over many years, they're working on the so-called purpose they had 5 years ago. Well, the world, you know, as we know, the last 2 years, the world's changed out of all recognition. So there's nothing like how, you know, there's no such thing as this is how we used to do it. Everything is up for grabs. And write your narrative, your purpose around that, but be prepared in a year's time or 6 months' time to change it again when the world changes around you.
Thank you, Paul. I do think that the reason why I came to you with that question was I do think storytelling as a sort of skill and a discipline is so powerful in many organisations, but particularly I find in local government, where it's very complex, the range of services that are being offered. And I was at a client meeting about a month ago, and I was with the senior leadership teams, the chief exec and the directors, and it was a fairly open session that I was facilitating around change, but it all came, they brought up this issue with this person who had complained about a service and how they dealt with it, and they walked through for that individual all of the different parts of the council that particular situation touched, and really bonded over that story of this young woman, and she was struggling with her housing, and this was how we had to help her. And I think that when it's such a complex service offering, you know, there isn't other sectors that do things quite as broad as local government does. Even other public sector organisations tend to be fairly fixed in what they offer. Local government can be doing social care, emptying bins, lawyers, doctors. That's got a huge role to play in public health, so extremely varied. And then so when you bring in that story of let's focus on almost a customer journey, let's focus on a person and how we impact their lives, I think that makes it so much more relatable than focusing on things like you know, case numbers. And as important as they are, I don't think people connect with them in quite the same way.
Yeah, just quickly, just jumping in on that, I think there are numerous case studies, you know, which we can share in other places of local authorities, in the same way as Lyndsey's done, who have done all that in really creative ways. So the one that comes to mind quickly is Hackney Council, who are, you know, this was before the pandemic, who wanted to engage their customers and their clients and their residents in this kind of discussion. So they converted an old, you know, Hackney in London, they converted an old black cab into a video booth, drove it round the borough, and people could jump in and record their often quite negative views about what the council doing and their positive views of what they could do, in line with the kind of work that Lyndsey's doing very positively in her community, and then capture that and then turn that into policy and stories and narratives and meaning and strategies, etc. So there's really creative ways you can do it. So it doesn't need to be dull stuff.
No, not at all. There was a Northwest Council, I don't know, it might have been St Helens, but I might be misquoting there, who basically built a giant cardboard castle and invited members of the community to just turn up at this site and contribute to making bricks out of cardboard. And while they were doing all that, they then chatted to them. And was like, so tell us what's going on in your life. And again, this traditional method of consultation being, we put some proposals on a website and people fill a form in, and it was very, very different and got much richer information and much more personable stories from that than traditional methods.
Well, I did some work with Southwark Council where they took out a sofa and a standard lamp and a sort of mocked up TV. And toured it around all the sort of high streets in the borough, and the leader just sat on, the political leader of the council sat on the sofa, just talking to people, not asking them like the 10 questions that Ipsos Mori have suggested they asked, and that's quite powerful stuff and creative and fun. Yeah.
Taking your suit off, isn't it? It's about being a person and connecting and having those stories. I think if I can just hop in here, it's a bit, I've been reflecting on what's been said in terms of stories. I know you introduced me earlier saying I do a lot of organisational change. So where I work with organisations, I will always start, as I said earlier, with vision. Then you look at the values and behaviours, and then what I would do is create, I call it a culture statement, but it's an aspirational culture statement, which is in its essence a story. So, you know, it's supposed to be, ignite people's excitement and emotion. And it's based on a lot of workshops that I do with across the organization. But that's a wonderful thing to have. But ultimately, what you're expecting people to do as a result of this work is to change their behavior. And that means that every single person has to incrementally change their behavior towards what this aspirational story or statement or whatever says. And I think actually, when we're talking about true change, if you're asking somebody to change how they behave, that's hard. You're asking people to change habits. And I think this is where purpose comes in. If people do not see a sense of purpose, they are going to be resistant to that personal change. So we talk about, organizational organizations with integrity. I know all the values I've ever done with organizations, there's always one in there that is around integrity, you know, about respect and, you know, all of that. But then actually walking the talk is hard, because that requires every single individual to change how they might behave and how they might have behaved in the past. And without the why, without the purpose, you are not going to get people to really embrace that change. So yeah, just a bit of reflection on how important ultimately we're asking people to change the behavior. And without purpose, you know, you're barking up a dead tree, flogging a dead horse, whichever one you want to use.
Definitely. Lyndsey, do you have any reflections on what we've been talking about?
Yeah, we used a lot of storytelling, and we continue to use that, and we've actually gone to printed press as well. You know, we actually produced a magazine that we share with all the households now as well, part of one of our projects. But I'll also say as well, in the storytelling, so not so much from an individual, this is what we've achieved for this resident story, but more of a storytelling from organisations, and just a really simple twist of how we work. Our Community Action Network, all of our partners, all of our organisations, people are invited to share their stories. So we have hot topics, we have normally up to 4 of those each meeting. And this is very different to how it used to function. So the meeting really is our former health and wellbeing partnership. And it was very top-down driven. You know, you turned up to it because you were hoping you might get some commissioned services at some point. But you listened to what was going on. And maybe then there wasn't any other business where lots of people were trying to get their point across. And I found that those types of meetings really didn't encourage collaboration, because people were just looking around the table at who else was in competition with them and how they could position themselves at the front. Whereas the way we're working now, you know, people are invited to put onto the agenda. They come with a project that they have resourced through, you know, either external funding or through their organisation, and they're inviting other organisations and people to be part of that with them and to collaborate and to add and to extend into that project, which is such a simple thing. But because that environment is there for them to do it, it is encouraging that, you know, that new way of working to collaborate. And it's fun as well, because it's not so corporate. We have things like, you know, last meeting we had the care organisation for the borough of the county showcasing about some sort of fashion show, you know, like something lovely for individuals who are caring for their loved ones, you know, unpaid carers. So it was just nice projects as well as more kind of strategic projects as well. So a bit more of that human aspect as well to that meeting.
Thank you. Just to people listening in, do feel free to, I was just going to say, do feel free to put in some comments and any questions, but we do just have one. I did just want to come back to what Penny was saying. One of my favourite, I don't know what to call it, but Simon Sinek does this whole skit about cleaning your teeth that I always resonate with, where he says that, you know, if you don't clean your teeth one day, your teeth won't go bad. The magic, and if you clean your teeth in one day, your bad teeth won't go good. The magic is in the consistency of doing it every single day, and you will never know. And it's a bit like that with eating healthily or doing exercise. It's not the one thing that makes a difference, it's the consistency that makes a difference. And that's very, very true of culture change, that it is that consistency of demonstrating it, talking about it, that consistency of leadership that makes the difference. You can't just do one staff event and one launch of something and then carry on as you were, and that's always stuck with me, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I'll have to look up this Simon Sinek chap, because I've seen some of his stuff, but you broke up on my line here, so that brushing teeth thing I passed over my head, so I'll have a look at that. But you're exactly right. I think people who are running change programs often see communication as just a series of events. We'll do a fortnight, we'll do a sort of bi-monthly staff briefing, we'll do a weekly newsletter, you know, we'll have a workshop about this, we'll do an IT lunchtime training set, or whatever it might be. And don't understand that it's nothing to do with the the events that's getting the message across. It's how they're behaving in between the events. And I think, again, this is encroaching on Penny's area, but I think there is more support that we need to be giving to managers and leaders in terms of how they can communicate as human beings. And often some of them, you know, on a one-to-one basis, often a lot of them, the senior people, are really good blokes and nice women and, you know, very personable, but somehow they go into PowerPoint mode the moment you put them in front of big groups of people, and seem quite scared and frightened about being open and honest with people. They're worried about the media or something leaking or that sort of thing. So I think there is, you know, this is what Penny no doubt makes, you know, pays her mortgage from, but, you know, there is a lot more to do around the purpose and engagement part of your model, Lucy, in terms of training, supporting, and encouraging managers to do a better job. And also perhaps the culture of the organisation, saying that if, you know, we don't employ managers who can't communicate. Often managers are appointed because they're good at the office politics, or they're very good at their professional area, but they're all often very poor at communicating and engaging staff. So why don't we start appointing managers because they can actually manage and lead, rather than they're very good at planning or digging roads, or even something like social services and whatever. So I think Penny's probably won't need to take a holiday for the next 10 years to try and get this right.
I was just going to say something that's completely gone out my head. I've really got a blank. I think it's the idea of taking a holiday.
Just dangle that in front of you there.
Oh yes, I remember what I was going to say. Yeah, I think it's surprising. Yeah, I do a lot of management training as well, and it is just nuts, isn't it, that from the day we're born, we are learning how to communicate, and it is the one thing that so many organizations do not do well, and people don't do well. They don't communicate well. And I do think a lot of it is around lack of training, definitely, lack of culture around communication, definitely. But I think it's about people also, as individuals, not allowing themselves to be vulnerable in their communication. You know, everyone is there. If you think of the whole psychological safety, how many people actually feel psychologically safe in their role? So they don't want to say something so they look stupid, or they don't want to look ignorant in some way, shape or form. So they keep stum, or they tailor how they communicate because they're managing their image. But actually, if you're talking about stories, helping managers define their own story, and allowing them to build the confidence to share it, and that it's okay to have those stories, would really do, take the success, the opportunity for success so much further. Because you're right, it comes down to team leaders, middle managers being able to communicate the why. And if they've been enabled to understand their why and understand how their personal story is aligned with that, and given them permission to communicate that, how powerful would that be?
Sometimes communicators and PR people like me in our organisations are not helping, because we're developing for media interviews and whatever, and even internal stuff. We're developing briefs, briefs, lines to take. Here are your 3 key messages or whatever. So no wonder sometimes our chief execs and our political leaders or whatever are falling over their words, because they're trying to remember the 3 key messages rather than being authentic as they are as a person and just telling the story. So I take part of the blame, I'm afraid. Yeah.
I think I'd be interested to come to Lyndsey with this reflection as well. But I one of the things I really did notice during the pandemic was that it became okay for senior leaders to be vulnerable. It became that uncertainty, we all had it, and it became very okay for senior people in the public sector to be open about the fact that they didn't know what the government was going to say at the next briefing. They didn't know what was going to happen next. What they knew was that they had to make this happen right now. So can we make this happen right now? So that pressure of always being the person with all of the answers was taken away, which I think opened up a space for a more authentic engagement with people. We know we've got to keep people safe, so it's you know, open to all. How do we keep people safe? How do we make sure vulnerable people get what they need, rather than here is my script of something that I've got to say. I think that happened to a large degree at a national level, but at a local level, people had to just take some risks and be comfortable with that uncertainty. Maybe comfortable is too strong of a word, but work through that uncertainty. And Lyndsey, as you were working very much on the front line, was that your perception too?
It was, yeah, and a term that was used quite frequently was ask for forgiveness, not permission, because of the rate that we were working at and doing what we thought was absolutely the best thing to do. Don't get me wrong, there was some fear driven into us at the same time, because we were told by colleagues in the forces that, you know, what if somebody dies because of, you know, what we're doing, because of, you know, there's not enough food, and what will they do in the dock if you've been working 20 days in a row? You know, you need to take a day off. It was insisted that we took time out, and it felt like I would imagine it would feel to work in a military environment where you're making very, very important decisions day in, day out. And so there was kind of a real mixed balance, really, because there was that real kind of fear driven into us about the severity of what we were dealing with, but knowing, like you say, Lucy, that it was all brand new to everybody. I mean, I was learning a brand new job, and so were many others. And I think in some ways that was a real advantage, because, you know, you're fresh, you've not got anything else to think about, and you're very much focused on that as well. And leaders as well showed their vulnerability, which has been, you know, it's been great for relationship building, because often people need to drop that facade, you know, like Paul said. I mean, I reflect on my own personal experience. I was 24 when I first got a very senior role, and I actually used to lie about my age. I didn't want people to know how old I was. I was managing assistant head teachers in secondary schools, and I think it's at that time I put guards up and I acted in a certain way because I thought I needed to be very professional, very driven, very working hard, and I lost my personality. And I think that during the pandemic, people have had their personalities on display, front and centre. Humour's been fabulous. It's got us through this. It's been who we are. You know, people have got to know each other. I was just saying, my dog's gone on a walk, but many people now know I have a dog, and people get to know about your family situation, because it's essential that, you know, somebody might be off screen because they've got a child on their hip. There's been all sorts of things that we've learned through the pandemic that have helped, or we've been forced into, really, that have helped us to build more lasting relationships, and we've known people rather than jobs and titles. And I think that's something that I hope we'd keep on hold of as well, and spend more time to build those relationships as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that it fundamentally changed the relationship between leaders and their workforce, when the workforce could see their leader saying, look, I actually don't know what is exactly the right thing to do here. Let's work together and figure it out. It brought in a much more empowering power dynamic where it wasn't so parental. It was much more teamwork. And that's something that I really, truly hope that we keep, because I think it would be sad for that to go. Penny, what's your reflections on this as working with different organisations? Have you seen that too?
I think it comes back to that, you know, that human element. We've all been allowed to be human, and, you know, as you said earlier, that, you know, governance, bureaucracy, it's not all of it's gone out the window, but, you know, things have had to get done. You know, people have had to move at speed, and so almost this sort of quite old-fashioned hierarchy and stuffiness has almost gone out the window, and people, as you say, you know, from the very top to the bottom, are allowed to be human and allowed to be vulnerable and to show the personalities. And I think, yeah, the focus, the ability to just be you as a person rather than a title or, you know, a place in a hierarchy is something that has enabled the change to happen. And I think this real transition is like what I said very earlier on, this transition to people wanting to be able to be themselves, to be able to work hard for a purpose, hence moving jobs, etc. It has become so important. Long may it continue. And I do think it comes down to leaders at the end of the day, and how, to what extent they allowed themselves to be vulnerable over the pandemic. Because I think if they've had almost like a light bulb moment as a result of it, you know, they've had a real reflection about the benefits of the changes that have happened, then they will try and continue and embed it. But I suppose not everybody has done this, you know, been vulnerable. So it does come down to the leaders at the end of the day.
So on that topic, and I sorry, Paul, were you going to say something then? Well,
I was just I was going to say a couple of things. One, we had this discussion while we were just sort of waiting to come onto the call about this technology. It has been a great leveler, and long may it continue, to be honest, because, you know, in the old days you used to go to lots of boring meetings with people around the table, somebody at the head of the table, agendas and all that sort of stuff, which is, you know, a good discipline to have. But here we're all literally on the same level, and people were wearing their, you know, they weren't wearing suits and ties and skirts and all that. You know, they were in jeans and t-shirts and hoodies and all. So they could be the new apprentice, or they could be the chief executive, especially the young ones like Lyndsey. If we lose that by just all going back to the office, or we don't try and translate that approach that we're taking on this kind of call to the office, and I think we've lost a real big opportunity. The other thing is just a bit of realism around, you know, we're talking with passion, and, you know, we're evangelists for purpose and missions and narrative and stories or whatever. We have to accept that a lot of people just turn up to work to earn money to pay for the things they really enjoy. So there has to be a real understanding of who your audience is and what they need from you. And not everybody needs to be inspired by a purpose. They just need the nuts and bolts of information to get on with their job, finish at 5 o'clock and go back home and do stuff they really enjoy and bank the salary, as it were. So I think we need to be careful. Not everybody wants to come and be inspired by a chief executive listening to them about purpose. They just want to know, you know, after you've done this change, am I going to have a job? You know, why are you doing it? Where do I fit in? What's going to happen to my team? What happens to me? Do I do the same job? If I change jobs, you know, if you make me change jobs, how am I going to get training? Am I still going to be paid next week? You know, that sort of basic stuff is important for most human beings, rather than the big highfalutin narrative stuff that people like me like to talk about.
I do think you're right. My benchmark for that is, if people are working for me, what would I want them to say to their family members about their job? So even if it is just a job, I'd still want them to feel like it was a worthwhile job. So I think people will vary in terms of how ambitious they are. People will vary in terms of whether they, you know, want to be really inspired to take over the world. But I still think even people that just want a job still want to be able to tell a story about why they did a good job.
Yeah.
I think that, and one of our goals in our cultural statement, if you will, our statement of the vision of what the future of Trueman Change will be, is people that work for us will say it's the best job I ever had. That's a goal that we have. Now, I don't know if we're achieving it. We're still very early in our journey, but that is something that I think if every person in my team that manages others knows that it's their job to make sure that person says it's the best job I ever had, then I think that will set us up well, regardless of that individual person's level of ambition.
Yeah.
The question I wanted to ask, and I asked this on all of our sessions, is if you were training, and this is true in Penny's case, but if you were training the next generation of leaders, what advice would you give them that's based on your learning from the pandemic? So how we did change differently in the pandemic, and you had to advise somebody that was learning how to be a leader based on that. What would you say?
I think it's be human, be authentic, you know, try understand yourself, you know, really undergo some self-awareness and some coaching maybe around who you actually are, where your strengths are, and then have the confidence to be you, and to be vulnerable and to communicate. Because I think, yes, I mean, if I look at I talked about, I use Lumina psychometrics. So I look at the outcome focus and the people focus. I think it's trying to balance those two. Yes, it's important that, you know, you deliver the service or you make the money, but it's actually, you're not going to do that well without really engaging the people. So it's about having a foot in each camp of, you know, being able to be approachable, to be able to communicate, to be able to empathize, to be able to be yourself, to say, I don't have all the information, you know, I don't know the answers. And to support people in delivering those outcomes. And I just think that it's fundamental to leadership. And obviously, you know, be adaptable as well, because change is rapid. It's never going to go away. And they'll need to be able to embrace it and to move with it and to be able to communicate that at the same time. So yeah, those elements I think are what I would definitely be coaching and training people on.
Lyndsey?
Yeah, probably a couple. I mean, the thing that you know, I've talked about, obviously the work we did for the hub and the work we did in my day job as well, is really focusing on empowerment of others, and, you know, creating that space where people feel like they can, you know, they're free to do what they want to do. You know, they've got permission to run and run with ideas and fail if that happens. That's okay, because we'll learn from it. So I think that's a biggie for me, just making sure that people feel inspired, that they have that opportunity to push themselves and to achieve as much as they possibly can and to learn through that journey. I think that Paul might mention communication, so I'm going to pause at that point and pass on to Paul, because I don't want to steal your thunder, Paul. I know you're going to come up with something far better than I would around communication, so over to you.
I'm not actually, you go ahead.
Are you not? Oh, okay, so yeah, I think, well, that is the biggie for me as well, just being available, you know, make yourself available for people, be very approachable, you know, just by having that conversation, or being, you know, behaving in that way, like Penny said, be authentic to who you are. If you're not a natural chatty person, make sure people know that as well, so that sometimes people can feel you're a bit cold, or you don't, you know, you're not approachable, and it's just because you might not send those vibes naturally. But just to let people know who you are and how that communication could be most effective. Like I say, you know, my personal number was given out during the pandemic to so many organisations, and lots of withheld numbers and numbers I didn't know. I never would normally answer them, but during those first few weeks of pandemic, I was meeting people, and it was very, very, it's energy sapping, isn't it, when you're constantly meeting new people and keeping high energy and not just going, who are you? It's like, hi, really nice to speak to you. Kind of, what do you do in your organisation? And jotting down lots of notes. Really caring, and, you know, knowing that ultimately will build a relationship which will benefit yourself and others going forward. So, you know, strengthen those communication, but being very natural with it as well. So it's not about presentation and other things, it's about having conversations and building relationships.
Thank you. Paul?
Well, actually, if you'd asked this question a couple of weeks ago, I might have given a different answer, but actually Lyndsey says something which I think was quite powerful, and I actually noted it down, around ask for forgiveness, not permission. So I think the pandemic proved to local government in particular that not everything needs a strategy, not everything needs a spreadsheet, not everything has to go through several committees and meetings and be signed off by chief execs or whatever. You can just go and do it, and not use the old-fashioned bureaucratic, or not hide behind the bureaucracy, as it were. So that sort of can-do mentality, I think, is really important. I would also advise, this is not serious at all, but I would also advise in this world of Zoom, my older male colleagues to get some better advice on their dress sense on Zoom calls. Me included.
I feel like there's a story behind that we should probably unpick at some point. So what about in the whole theme of creating a purpose? What advice would each of the panel members give around how to create a sense of purpose during a change programme?
Well, we've all talked about it for the last hour and a half, I guess, but it's the advice for me is that purpose comes from I've said it before, from the organisation. It's not done to the organisation. So it has, people need to stop telling organisations this is how we're going to change, and actually have a much more grown-up conversation with our colleagues about why that change is important, not just to the organisation strategically, but people telling you how and why they want the organisation to change to support them to achieve whatever they think their purpose is.
It's exploring the why. We've talked about it, but it is exploring the why, understanding the why. What happens if we do this? What happens if we don't do this? What's the impact on people? What's the impact on the bottom line? Try and make sense of it. And if you can make sense of it and it makes sense, then you can communicate it and you can tell stories. If you can't make sense of it, it's just about, earning an extra million. Well, who cares? The workers don't care about, lining the directors' pockets with cash. They care about delivering the quality service. So there needs to be a real why. There needs to be a why.
Thank you. Lyndsey.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And again, bringing lots of different organisations together, people have all got their own different whys, haven't they? But it's looking at finding that common ground. And sometimes it's just having a slightly flexible approach to that to make sure that it encompasses everyone's kind of whys, and it is an overarching thing, which is what the hub was. That umbrella gave us that opportunity to bring lots of different people together who were approaching the final outcome in different ways, and we're achieving things that contributed towards that, and they could see how they were part of the bigger picture. So it's not always that the purpose is exactly shared, but the overall overarching purpose might be something and should be something that everyone can buy into.
Thank you. I think I would add that keep coming back to it, because that's where the magic happened during COVID, I think, was the constant coming back to, but will this help keep people safe? Will this save lives? And the purpose at the start, if we don't keep coming back to it all the time, it is a paperwork exercise. It's just a branding exercise. It doesn't really mean anything. But the other reflection, which leads me nicely onto our second segment of the wheel, which we will be having an event on in December, is clarity. And I have a saying, which is purpose without clarity is just a wish, and clarity without purpose is a chore. So you absolutely need both. So you need that sense of purpose as why are we here, and then that clarity around what is it that we are trying to change, what is it that we're going to do differently. And I think, again, going back to the pandemic, the example I so often use was that, organisations for a long time in the public sector where I work were saying we want to be more flexible or agile, but never really nailed it. During COVID, they said everybody has to work from home by Monday. And that clarity, the power that clarity gave, meant that we have to keep people safe. Therefore, everybody has to work from home by Monday. Then every decision we make can check against those two things. But will this help us work from home by Monday? And I think that powerful sense of those two together, that sense of purpose that's emotive and that has meaning behind it, versus the clarity on exactly what you're going to do differently, I think that's what made the magic happen. Any final thoughts from panel members?
Other than I've really enjoyed the discussion. It's been lovely to hear from both Lyndsey and Paul. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thanks for everyone who's dialed in to listen in today. So our next one, if Charlotte, you could please add the link into the chat. Our next one is about clarity, and we have a couple of brilliant speakers lined up for that as well, and we're going to hope to confirm another couple between now and then, but it is on the 3rd of December, and we'll be exploring there, how do you create that very clear sense of this is what we're trying to achieve. And I do think that is a challenge, actually, because, you know, you've got that balancing act between the co-production, the co-design, which I think was hugely, hugely powerful during the pandemic, but also that sense of, but we just have to be clear and make some clear decisions. So we'll be talking about that tension there. We'll be talking about how you build that clarity, and we'll be talking about, again, how you communicate that. If there's anything that you can do, that we can do to help you, so we help organisations to plan change journeys. We offer a service where we look at how we can implement all of the learnings from the pandemic into other organisations. So if that's something you'd like to talk to us about, then do feel free to reach out to me or one of my team members. And we also do smaller pieces of work, similar to what we've done with Lyndsey, around going in and capturing those lessons learned. I think we're at a really unique point in time at the moment to reflect and think about how we managed to do change very differently during the pandemic, and it would be an awful shame to sort of let that go. So do get in touch with us. We have a white paper on our website about the lessons during the pandemic. We are refreshing that at the moment based on the research we've done since the first lockdown, but the original white paper is still there. And thank you again to all of the speakers, Paul, Lyndsey and Penny. It's been absolutely invaluable. It's always lovely to run these events. That's why we've kept doing them. It's hugely helpful for me, and I know it's helpful for other people on the call. So thank you again for your time, and we hope to see you all soon.